This video accompanies the first section on the worksheet on party joinder review, the Parson and Deckler exercise. So what you should have done already is read the first portion of the worksheet discussing step 1, focusing on the call of the question. Then watch this video. If you haven't read through the worksheet and completed the short multiple choice questions in this section of the worksheet, stop the video and do that first. You'll get the most out of the video if you've had a chance to both read the textual material and try answering those questions. Right now that you had a chance to make sure that you've gone through that portion of the worksheet, let's talk a little bit about our first steps here. Realize what we're trying to do in this exercise is help you think about how to strategically answer questions on an exam in a topic like civil procedure where there are a lot of rules that you can potentially consider. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about issue spotting and how to identify what rule is being triggered in a particular essay question. This process will help you whether or not you're answering a long essay question or short answer essay questions. Right, the first step is focusing on the call of the question. Now, in this exercise, we're only focusing on party joinder, but the step of thinking about the call of the question would have helped you figure out that that's actually the process that's at issue. Notice in our first one, before we get to the discussion of Rule 20, all of these answer or calls of the question address party joinder. Some of them specifically saying, can we join this person as a party? Other ones just saying, join them to the suit. And then we'll see in the next example under Rule 14 and Rule 19, we have different language including, can we just add them as a party to the suit? All those kinds of phrases are trying to introduce someone new to the suit, so you should be thinking party joinder. So focusing on the topic that we had you think about in this part of the worksheet is, knowing it's party joinder, which rule would you discuss? There's a lot of party joinder rules. And this process will help you think about all of our topics, like discovery. What discovery rules would I want to talk about? Claim joinder. What claim joinder rules do I want to talk about? Motions to dismiss a case. What motions do I want to talk about? All right, but since we're in party joinder for this one, you'll notice that all of the possible calls of question here do not list any of the rules in them. So part of the test is asking you to identify which rule you need to think about. In order to do this, you want to think globally about each rule. In the second section of the worksheet, which you may want to complete even before you delve further into this issue, we discuss how to make a rule checklist, and it will help you think a little bit more concretely about each of the rules. But even before you do that, if you think about each rule, there's a basic for party joinder. Who is trying to join under this rule? Who are they trying to join? Who's the outsider trying to come in? And what's the rough standard that they'd have to complete? Now remember, when you're thinking about the call of the question and trying to issue spot a rule, you're trying to make that first basic cut. Does this rule even come up as a possibility of what I might discuss? What you're not doing at this phase is deciding whether or not the rule actually will help with joinder. In other words, you're just trying to say, does this question trigger the possible discussion of it? Realize your professor might be looking for you to talk about a rule and say that in the end, ultimately, it will not help to provide joinder of the party at issue. That doesn't mean that you would rule out that rule. In fact, you'd want to say it's triggered by this conversation, but it's just that in the end, ultimately, it will not help with the joinder at issue. All right, so if you sense what I'm trying to say here, what we're trying to do is just get a very, very broad level, high view of whether this rule is even possibly at play, just to narrow it down a little bit. And our next step, we're going to narrow it down further and say, well, some of the rules that are possibly at play ultimately will not help joinder, and so I may not want to talk about them as much. And deciding whether you want to actually discuss the rule or how much you want to discuss about the rule is an issue we'll take up in step 2. So right now, the global, is it even possibly raised? All right, so looking through these, think who can do the joining, who are they trying to join, and the rough standard, what one triggers Rule 20, or which ones? The answer is A. And that's because Rule 20 is a rule the plaintiff can use to add people to the suit. so it's the claimant essentially, can use to add people to the suit. Deckler here is a regular defendant. He's not asserting a cross-claim against anyone and trying to use reference to Rule 20 to add parties to that cross-claim. He's just a defendant and he wants to bring someone else in. Well, Rule 20 doesn't help him. It can help Parsons. At this phase, all we're trying to do is say that's a possibility. A plaintiff wanting to use this. When I'm asked as the call of a question of whether or not Parsons can join and how she can join Blades, Rule 20 is an option. Does it mean it ultimately will allow for joinder or not? At this phase, all I'm looking at is it's a possibility. It's not a possibility here because defendant, who's just a regular defendant, cannot use Rule 20. Same with the outsider. The outsider has no access to joinder through Rule 20. That's why A is the only one that possibly even raises a discussion of Rule 20. If you look at the next one, Rule 14, which examination question here would at least get you to think about a Rule 14 analysis? The answer is, for this one, is B. Deckler would like to join Blades Incorporated as a party to the suit. Discuss whether and how Deckler can join Blades Incorporated to the suit. This is the correct option, B. All right, why is that the correct option? Well, as you know from the who can use Rule 14 to join and who can they join with Rule 14 and our rough standard, Rule 14 allows people who are defending parties to join a non-party to the suit if that person is or may be liable to them for all or part of the claim brought against them. So in general, just even giving our rough analysis, this question, Parson believes Blades Incorporated is responsible for injuries and would like to join them, does not trigger Rule 14. Why not? Because she's not defending anything in this action. And so right now, this would be something I don't think this call of the question is really trying to get me to even discuss Rule 14. Now, it may be something I can discuss under B. I'd have to look further and decide whether or not I think 14 would really help the Deckler here. That's the next issue. That would be step 2. But for right now, this call of the question helps me think about this. Let's look at the Rule 19 question. Which one of these exam questions would trigger a discussion of Rule 19? The answer to this is C, both A and B. In this, you see two different ways to stylize a possible raising of Rule 19. If you note, option A is very similar to the call of the question we saw just in the last iteration. Deckler would like to add Blades Incorporated as a party to the suit, discuss whether or not Blades Incorporated can be joined to the suit. So that means the general call of the question like this might raise multiple possibilities of what could be discussed. We'll address then in our second step, when you have a larger screened in option, how you prioritize your discussion of those rules. You may in fact decide that you want to discuss primarily Rule 14 and not 19, or vice versa. We'll get to that next. But right now in this phase, all we've done is say these seem to fairly raise the option of discussing Rule 19. Why? Well, remember, a defendant can say this was a person who was necessary and should have been joined to the suit. And so basically forcing the joinder through compulsory joinder under 19. B also raises Rule 19, and it's a very specialized call of a question. Let's look at it. Deckler moves to dismiss the action under Rule 12b-7 for failure to join a necessary party. Now remember, Rule 12b-7's dismissal only is in reference to compulsory joinder under Rule 19 for those necessary parties. So this call the question A, remember, triggered potentially both Rule 19 and 14. B certainly triggers 19, but that's all it triggers. Why? Because the only way to dismiss under 12b-7 is for failure to join a necessary party under Rule 19. Okay, so the answer here is C. But you can see that there's different ways to stylize raising the same rule, and that different forms of the call of the question closes the door, like B, more narrowly just to Rule 19, or leaves it more broadly opened where you're going to have to prioritize and make some decisions about what you discuss, like an answer option A. Let's look at one more. Which of these exam questions would trigger a discussion of Rule 24? Well, if we go back to our basic question of who can use this rule to join and whom are they joining, Rule 24 allows the non-party, the outsider, the person or entity, to join themselves as a party. And that is why C is the only correct answer here. It's a very narrow form of joinder, and so it would only be triggered where this option, the outsider, is trying to join themselves into the suit, is the possible call the question. Now realize there are other ways to phrase triggering discussion of any of these rules other than exactly as you see it here. You could rephrase this question, can Blades join themselves, or you can change it to something more generally, Blades consults you as an attorney and wants to know your advice on whether or not they can have any role to play in the suit, or something real broad like that. But just what you're seeing here is what mechanical pieces are necessary in order to trigger these rules. Alright, now that you finished this portion of the video, what you should do is finish reading the second section of the worksheet and working through those checklists, and then watch the second video.